Mr. Wilson, can you please take us to the live feed?
Go ahead.
And it's 6:03, Ms. Griffin.
Okay, it's 6:03, and at this time I have a board member that's going to be joining us for certain, another board member who's trying to access getting online, and two colleagues that are unable to join us this evening. So we are going to start this budget workshop, and when another board member shows up, we will have to stop and convene a meeting. So if you'd like to start, Mr. Polvino.
Sure. Mr. Carroll, can you pull up the screen for the PowerPoint? First of all, I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to come together. I know it's always difficult coming together for meetings, especially trying to coordinate our meetings and in the holiday season as well. So thank you. Hopefully we'll be very targeted and relatively focused and brief this evening. So as soon as we get that up on the screen, we'll get going. So this really is an opportunity for us to come together, and tonight we're going to really want to discuss with you some initial parameters in the process that we're going to be going through. Want to make sure that we have that. Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns at the present time with respect to any federal funding and state funding, things like that as well. So we'll work from there. So this is really our kickoff. Our workshop number one goal tonight is to establish our initial parameters that will guide decision-making through the preparation of our 21-22 budget, which will be one of the most interesting budgets that any of us have ever served on. We've had some experiences with some things back in 9, 10, 11, but this is going to be very different as well, but similar in some ways as well, where there's going to be a lot of tough decisions that we may be facing down the road. Next slide, please. Our workshop agenda was just always reminding ourselves of our mission, vision, beliefs, and guiding principles. The alignment, we've tried something a little bit different this year, so we're going to be looking forward to your feedback on that, trying to tie things back to our coherence plan and budget planning. Our recommend initial budget parameters, just this is where the discussion is. Is this where the board supports where we're at right now?
Mr. Polvino, can I interrupt quickly and call the meeting to order?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I see Mrs. Lyons joined us. So I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:06. And if someone would move item 1.02.
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? I'm a yes. Just if you want to put your thumb up. Can you see everybody's thumb, Mrs. Perry? There's not many of us. There's 4. I see 4. Yep, there's 4. Okay, I'm sorry. Now it's back.
Okay. We agreed that's what was going to happen. So I was just saying that we're recommending some initial parameters. You'll find they're really quite similar to in the past. Financial considerations and key impacts on budget, starting to lay the foundation with some things. Although a lot more to follow in the next month and a half, especially when that governor's budget comes out later tonight. I will say that I sat on a small cities school call today as a member of the board of directors for the small cities. And we met with a business person from the Assembly, Matt Golden, who works with the Assembly in their budget component. And it was interesting, not a lot of answers and understanding of what the issues are in the small cities. I thought we did a good job sharing some very common understandings there, but very clear that January toward the end, when that initial, it has to really become much clearer when the executive announces the tentative budget that he announces by the end of January. So that'll be an interesting time. And then our budgeting strategy and then next steps. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of our mission and vision. It should be at the central of everything that we do, regardless of what pandemic or what issues we're facing. The mission and the vision that we have is very much at the center of everything that we do. And we should always remind ourselves of that as we enter any meeting this time of year. It's even more essential than we do on any other day. This is important. This is it what we're doing, the budgeting decisions we're making, bring us back to accomplishing our mission and vision. Next slide. We also want to remind ourselves of our beliefs and our guiding principles. And all of those are a part of our strategic plan. And it's interesting, these guiding principles continue to be strong. And I think it's important. They've been in place in the Fulton City School District for many years, but look at that number one, create a safe, secure, positive learning environment. The second was our communications through effective and intentionally communicating. We've been working hard at that. Our quality educational experiences, trying to meet the needs of all students at all times. And then the fiscal responsibility through using sound and efficient practice. Very interesting that all four of those are so applicable over the years. So those have been very strong in our district and important to remember. Next slide, please. Coherence, just reminding us all what coherence means. It's really creating, and that's the center of our strategic coherence plan. It's making sure that individually and collectively that we have a shared understanding of what it takes to develop a high achieving school district. And I think that's that collective commitment coming together around those areas, that everything we do, that we have a focused direction, then we work together collaboratively, creating that sense of culture where we're making sure that we're getting that input and understanding of all the different stakeholders in our district, creating that collective commitment, deepening our learning, making sure that once we identify those areas to work on, that we have a clear, deep understanding of the work that needs to be done, and then we create the best plans. And then the fourth part of our wheel is securing that accountability in our program, and then it goes right back around. And we continue to hone the direction, create that collective commitment, and then move on from there. So that's about what our coherence is all about in our plan. And this is a slide that we've showed it previously, but it's a really strong slide, is that what it does is it ties the strategic intents, and I apologize, my phone is ringing, the strategic intents that are in our coherence plan. So this is a nice one-page snapshot for your reference in each of these areas. And the strategic intents are really those specific areas of focus, those goals. So for example, under literacy, 95% of our third grade students will be reading at or above grade level, and 80% of our students taking the English Regents will attain a level 4. Obviously, those are goals, and in there it talks about by 2024. But you can see each of the areas. It's a great reminder of what those strategic intents are across the 6 different areas of our plan, which are leadership, literacy, instruction, social, emotional, developmental health, family engagement, and innovation. And you can start to see how all 6 really overlap and connect to create that coherent connections, so that things aren't in isolation and silos, but rather that we're making decisions where they overlap, connect, and create that strong fabric with the work, and hopefully become part of who we are as a district. So you're not just in those individual areas, but you create those connections horizontally and vertically to result in something, 10 years from now, you can see how there's this strong foundation and commitment to each one of these areas. Next slide. So what we did this year was we did a little something different around initial budget parameters. So let me tell you how it's tied together. So you have your strategic coherence plan area. So you see leadership. And then in the initial budget parameters, we identified our big area was securing long-term fiscal health. We're facing some difficult challenges. So one of the things we want to be able to do is not only budget now, but really forecasting out over the next couple of years. And obviously, there's always going to be adjustments because the state and the federal will give us different revenue lines and different parameters that we're going to be working with, different pieces of information. But we want to make sure we have securing long-term fiscal health. So we're constantly looking out. So for example, under those areas, if you look at last year's presentation, you would have seen pages just kind of listings. Now what we've done is we've tied them to specific areas of the plan. So in this area, cost-effective education, tax rate stability from year to year. And you know how we talk about that 10 years, that we can actually chart out and we share throughout the process. Work with the tax cap, work within the tax caps. COVID, New York State, and federal impacts. This is huge. We've got the COVID-19 and the impacts that are happening on us. That's a new one this year because it came in kind of during our budget process this year, but now it's very much entrenched. And now we're going to be dealing with hopefully what's happening after we come out of the pandemic, which may have greater challenges than we even entered going into the pandemic, because now we're going to be dealing with the ramifications of not having our students in school each and every day in the presence of our fantastic teachers and administrators, providing them the best experiences possible. And then the fourth part is continue to adjust staffing to enrollment. So that's an idea of how this fits together. And I'm not going to read each one, but does this make sense? Because this is really that discussion, Ms. Griffin and team, with respect to those parameters that you want as a board, you want us to work with. So this is consistent with what we've used in the past for some of our initial parameters. I'll run through them quickly, and then we may want to have some discussion in this section, and then we can move on to the rest, or we can wait and come back. We can determine that. We'll see where we are in 3 slides. At the literacy one, this is just brings back our commitment to our literacy initiative. And then also, and this part is very important, this is probably going to be one of the most important parts of this budget, is really focusing on our multi-tiered systems of supports and enhance needed to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic on student learning. We're going to have kids that are in very different places that are reacting to the type of scheduling, whether it's remote, in-person, remote, in the hybrids. There's definitely an impact on every one of our students' learning. It doesn't matter, A to Z, every student in between is experiencing this in a very personal and different way, because everybody's a unique and different learner. And so I think that this is going to be a very important aspect of making sure that as we go through the budget process and making decisions, this is something that I would say to the board, is that you need to make sure that we're demonstrating that we're going to be able to support our kids. Some kids would have been in school. If we don't get back in, let's say by the end of the year, if the vaccines kick in and we're able to get everybody vaccinated, who knows, we might be back sooner. But for some kids, it will be a school year and then coupled with another 3 months. So we're talking some kids wouldn't have stepped in school for over 15 months in the physical setting, and all of the pieces that go along with that. You want on the next slide, please? On the next slide, this is our instruction. And this is really that focus on maintaining a strong instructional program responsive to students and teachers' post-pandemic needs. So this is really making sure that we continue and focus on the best range of opportunities for our kids. And we have a wonderful wide range of opportunities. But as we move forward, we're going to have to really prioritize and look at things. I will share good news today. You take this grain of salt month to month, but we did get our December state aid came in today. And it looks like, and Ms. Nichols, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like what we were anticipating is what we were given or what we received. That's good news. So that means that we've gone in this fiscal year with no withholdings in those areas. We did have some withholdings from last year. Is that correct, Ms. Nichols, at the end of the July and August payments? And we have shared that at a previous board meeting. So we watch very closely, but as I said earlier in tonight's presentation, that today when we were on with the representative from the Assembly, January is a big month because that's when the initial governor's budget will come out. Those budget runs, those initial runs come out. And then I think we'll also have to get some clarification because the state's fiscal year ends March 31st. So there's a lot that needs to happen from January to March. And so January, I think, is going to be a pivotal month. But the good news is we received this month. We are seeing some different approaches with respect to, is it pre-K, Ms. Nichols, as well as P-Tech. We're hearing some things, some withholding, some things that they're doing a little bit differently. Is that correct, Ms. Nichols?
Yes, they were requiring for universal pre-K, they slipped in a little line that said basically a maintenance of effort number, which is about 8% of the grant. Just kind of slipped that in, and it wasn't in prior years. So they're expecting us to kick in a little bit.
Yeah. And what it means by that, I think it was at about 58,000 less than we normally get. I don't have the figure right in front of me, but it wasn't
right around that. Right around that.
Right. I think it was 598 or something like that. So
yeah,
definitely have already have a bit of an impact. That came up at the small cities meeting today. That was brought up by our colleagues at one of the districts in the eastern part of the state. Brought that up and really focused on pre-K today and some of those other areas around health and safety. They have a large grant apparently in their district that was brought up, as well as P-Tech, were 3 areas where there seems to be a little bit of withholding and a little bit of play and a little bit different approach going on than some of our other state aid lines at this point in time. The social, emotional, developmental health, again, the multi-tiered systems of support you see there. And then obviously that continued focus, and it's going to be extremely important, that balance of academics as well as that social emotional learning, trauma sensitive, culture responsive practices, going to be essential. And we are blessed, and I'll use that word here in Fulton. That's an area that we had an area of strength going into this. And so hopefully we'll be able to build and maintain, because I think it's a strength that helps us in so many ways to meet the needs of our students and community members, as well as helping our teachers work with our kids in classrooms that bring a lot of different things to the table. Next slide, please. And then in the third area that we see as a budget parameter with our family engagement and innovation, maintaining and enhancing communication systems. We can always get better. We've come a long way, but there's continued work. And I think even as we go through this budget process, we're going to have to think about, even as we get back, how are we going to make sure we keep the rudder deep in this area? Because we're going to need family engagement, family partnerships, those connections more than ever before as we re-engage with learning 100% in person, hopefully much sooner than later. And then finally, in innovation, obviously our commitment to our one-on-one, again, great decision. Thank you to the board for supporting that. Gosh, it seems like about 2 years ago now, right? Yet that set us up perfect transitioning in to the situations we had last spring and this fall. We were really poised differently. I wouldn't say perfect by any means, but we were poised differently. At least we had a foundation to work from. So thank you to our tech division and all the work with Mr. Lisi and that team in particular that helped us get all of that equipment out, and hopefully also the connections for our students through the internet or through hotspots or whatnot. So those are the parameters that we have for the board, just to have in mind. These are the areas that we see connected to our strategic coherence plan at this time. So I wanted to share those with the board. Why don't we continue on, then we can come back. Next slide, please. Just want to give you a little bit of the story that we've been working on with Forecast 5, and Ms. Nichols, please jump in at any time. But this slide last time didn't have the circle on it. It was in the December 8th presentation, just to give you an idea. There is information around enrollments, things like that, were at our board meeting on the 8th. But this really shows that Great Recession, the state aid was reduced and then gradually increased over 3 years. So that really shows that window from, you see in 11 where it was kind of still on the rise, and then you see the 11 to the 12, we had that reduction. And then slowly but surely, it kind of came back up again by 14, kept building into 15. And then we've seen some nice kind of increases over the last couple of years with our revenues. Anything you'd add to that slide, Ms. Nichols?
Just in 2010 is when we had 2010, you can see how little state aid there is and we had federal money come in. The American Recovery and I can't remember the other R, ARRA though, that act gave us funds that filled in for the, helped fill in for the shortfall in state aid. So it really did take a while to recover from that.
Yep. And as you see how when you look at that from 10 to 11, that's a great point, Ms. Nichols. You have that high point of federal, the blue. And what's interesting is you go all the way over to 19, look where the second highest blue is. It looks like about the second highest, possibly the third after 11. But I think it's interesting, it's almost mirroring. You can start to anticipate, is it going to look like that again? And then you can see what happened trend-wise for that 3 years. So we could be setting ourselves up for something very similar, remembering in this year's current budget that there was a pandemic effect, $1 billion taken out of the education lines, and then it was replaced with $1 billion in CARES Act. Well, that's a one-time shot deal. So that means there's $1 billion shortfall the following year. Is that the best way to say that, Ms. Nichols?
That works.
So it's starting essentially with $1 billion hole, because it was filled with $1 billion of one-time monies in federal stimuli. So it's just something, because for us, that meant 1.383 million, if my memory serves me correctly. So obviously, even if the things were, and then we'll go on to the next slide, but it just shows the essence of what the issue is. Kathy, you want to talk a little bit about this one? This is our state aid categories, just another way to look at some things.
Right. You really have to look at the legend over there on the right, so you can see the different aids that are included here. We haven't had a lot of changes in the different aids, although foundation aid appears to have grown a little bit here. Our BOCES aid appears to be growing, but we have been utilizing BOCES, trying to look at it as, what's the most effective use. We've done Chromebook leases through BOCES, along with all the traditional student-related services like, CTE, and so we use them for a variety of things, and we do receive approximately 82% back the following year in BOCES aid. So that's worked well for the district. And building aid, of course, is a function of the capital projects that we've done and the financing that we've done. Foundation aid almost looks like it's grown a little bit, but obviously when we go from 19 to from the year ending 19, year ending 20, and the year ending 21, they're really, you can see 20 to 21, they're really, well, it's basically flat. So,
Kathy, I just wanted to say, on behalf of the BOCES board, the board made decisions with the superintendent not to put money in reserves, knowing the financial challenges that all the component districts are facing, and some of the reserves that they have that other districts don't are like for heavy equipment for some of their programs,
right,
and those sorts of things. So just to let everybody know that
that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not without a cost to that programming as BOCES tries to plan ahead for their needs.
Right. We received our BOCES surplus check this week, and it was a very, very large surplus. It was approximately $963,000, and part of the reason that it was that high was because they didn't fund some of those reserves. So they were trying to help, definitely trying to help the individual component districts, with their little crisis.
Kathy, on that, or Ms. Stickles, on that one, what was we had budgeted for what? And again, forgive me, normally I'm much better from memory, but didn't we originally budget right around 475 or thereabouts? So this as an anticipated?
Yeah, I wish I had that right in front of me, but I probably even a little bit less. The BOCES refund, because it could actually it could actually be very small. I think I budget right around 400, 350 to 450. I try not to go higher than that.
So I guess my point was, in our budget, we had anticipated less than what had come in. So that was a good thing. It kind of it assists with right now, when you look at the withholding that we took from last year, from August and July. So
right,
very good. So Dave, that was great. Thank you so much. That was a good part, or a good thing to bring up. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Anything else on this slide? So really it's a great way for you to see our state aid changes over time. Kind of starts laying that foundation. The next slide, please. So this one, Kathy, please chime in. So this one's actually a base projection. Dan, go to the next slide, and then I'll have you go backwards. So the slide you're going to be looking at really takes into consideration a tax cap of 2%. And this was just us doing a little bit of forecasting to get an idea. What's interesting in this year is that our tax, and we actually have a projection of what it could be out a number of years. And it could go up to a 5% based on the initials. Obviously, there was years where we could have gone to 4, but again, that's where but then the remaining years are going to be limited to 0.67 to 1.5 at what we're seeing right now. The pilot takes into consideration the pilot 375. That was the situation over at the old Sunoco plant, and it's Addis. And it takes into consideration the state aid is flat, and takes into consideration the transportation all of the discussion that's out there, and you've seen a lot through NISBA, as well as other support agencies with respect to that hole from March to June and whether or not the state government is going to aid that window from when school districts were closed. And so that takes that consideration in, and Kathy, that's approximately in the nines, thereabouts. And then also we've taken into the consideration the possibility of our penalty that's been looming the last couple of years with respect to our transportation, and obviously our continued pursuit of the forgiveness bill and addressing that issue. So it takes into consideration. Can you go back a slide now, please? So Kathy, can you work us through that, this slide, please, to what we're looking at?
Certainly. Basically, for the year that we're in right now, what we had shown, without a cut in or withholding in state aid, our revenue should equal our expenditures. We should be, you can see the columns are equal height. So we should end up where we expect to end up. We shouldn't be affecting our fund balance. For the following year, taking into those assumptions on the other slide, if we don't receive any more any more state aid, if we don't get federal money, and if we're not using our reserves, we could end up with a $3.3 million deficit. So meaning our expenditures would exceed our revenues. And that yellow line is showing our fund balance. And so it's saying that out of our fund balance, we'd have to make up that $3.3 million. And taking it out another year to 2023, again, without increases in state aid, what we'd be looking at is, again, having to dip into our reserves and fund balance. And at that point, it brings us basically right down to zero. So it's a rather grim picture if there are no increases in state aid to help us out here. And just showing minimal increases in the tax levy and other local forms of revenue.
Right, and what you have to remember is that obviously we can't predict where the state aid's going to be and the federal piece is longer term, but you can see is if the trend stayed and we weren't going to increase any state aids and that was staying flat, flat would be wonderful. Now think about that. If we did 5%, 10%, our foundation aid rides around $50 million, all of those different aid lines. And our foundation aid, correct me again if I'm wrong, but it's around 35 million in that top foundation line. So figure 5% or 10% would be $3.5 million, and 20% could be 7 million. So you start to do those. But this one I thought was a good one to start with, as a board, just to say, here's what would happen if we maintain flat funding from the state. And this is where in a year we would be looking at a 3.366 that does take into consideration the transportation issue. And we have to remember that it's based on the next year too. So in other words, transportation is always a year behind. It's the actuals that are in the governor's budget 1 year later. So it's just something but I think it's a great way to depict initially as we enter this process, because you know how we always do the roll forward budget and what that would look like. Kathy, we took into some consideration some contractual types of things as well, right? That's all built in?
Right. I mean, we put salary increases in here. We put increases in BOCES costs, contractual supplies. I think supplies we used 1%. I believe we used 1.5% increases in BOCES costs or contractual costs. Again, we put 8% as an increase for things like health insurance. And of course, right now they're predicting that the teachers' retirement system and the employees' retirement system, of course, that their actual percentage that we pay on payroll will increase. Obviously, our cost goes up as payroll increases, but their rates are actually anticipated to continue to climb.
Yeah. And there are some projections, doesn't it approach 18% down the road within 3 to 5 years?
ERS might be. ERS is TRS right now is around 10.
Yep.
And I just drew a blank on ERS, but it is ERS is projected to climb.
Yep. So it's just a slide. It's a great slide that helps us start to project out on a flat, taking into consideration some really key elements. So it gives us a good snapshot to work from, and then at future board meetings and budget sessions and committee meetings, we'll be able to hone that in, and we can really start to get a little bit better as we get more information from the federal side as well as the state side. That'll allow us to tighten up this projections and give us a better idea. But I wanted the board to get an idea of just taking in those components, the transportation component. This is what it would look like right now, just as an initial kind of kickoff, and it shows that we've got if revenues out are shorter than expenditures, then what happens is you end up starting to use your savings, and with the situation the state's in, the savings will be used up quickly. And so that's not the best way to build a budget. And so we're going to be challenged with making some probably difficult decisions as we move forward, as we get more information. And I want to make sure that going back to our strategic intents and to our budget parameters, that we keep those always at the center of our decision making.
Brian, yeah, I just had a question. Did the forecast, this slide, take into consideration any changes in enrollment, assuming that it's probably a decline, or?
This one did not. So this would have the same staffing that we have right now. So it's not that detailed right now. It certainly, we can look at things, and making changes. This is basically taking what we have right now and just moving forward with percentage increases.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And that's a great point, Dave. At the last board meeting on the 8th, on slide numbers, it looks like number 7. It's actually a great point that Dave brings up. We brought up that's the birth rate data, and it also, our enrollment story is on the page previous to that, slide 5, and it shows our declining enrollment from where we were in 2011, which was 3656, and then 3,200 this present school year. So it's a great point. And then there's also, I believe, a graph. I'm not sure if it's in there or not. I'm not sure I provided that last time. But we actually have a graph, Dave, where it actually matches the enrollment history matched with our staffing. It's a great graph, and we can provide that. We'll provide that in a future meeting, because it really shows that we've tried to keep them matched pretty closely. It's a great point. Thank you. I was looking at it right now. I just pulled it up on the other screen. So that's that slide. We just want to be able to provide. You can start to see kind of the challenge that's before us. It's a great way to capture that. The next slide, please. We went over this before. We went backwards. And then the key impacts that we need to keep in mind. The New York State fiscal situation continues to be in that upper $13 to $14 billion gap. There's always the discussion around withholding of state aid to schools up to 20%. And that means it could be anywhere from 0 to 20 and anywhere in between. So I want to point out that my point of view on this was that when you take $1 billion out of the original $27 billion, I believe if it's about 4%, there's already been a 4% hit. It just happened to be covered and filled by the federal CARES. But when you think about that, there's a 4% right there out of the initial balance. So I think it's just something to keep in mind. There's no reduction in New York State mandates to school districts. We continue to share some strategies and some ideas. The small cities has been working on a couple of things. Local and regional economic picture is impacted by the pandemic as much as we are being impacted. They are being impacted. And we are hearing that municipalities have had withholdings. And so that impacts on services and opportunities in our communities. And obviously, our families and our teachers and our schools are within the community. So obviously, we're going to experience the ramifications. The good thing is we go into this whole process I believe still with no designation. We haven't seen this year's state comptroller report, but we had gotten down to no designation, and coming into this year we were. So there's no reason to think we're not. But again, we always wait for that designation. It always feels good to get something from the comptroller that says that you were in no designation at this point in time. This district, we had the board here and the team here previous to me, and while we've been here, I've worked from being on those types of lists to all the way to being at no designation. And that didn't happen in a year. That was 5 to 7 years worth of work getting it back to be where they are. So that was many years to recover through that. So because it was at one point we were at moderate fiscal stress, and to see us at no designation and be there, that's years and years of work with many teams and multiple boards contributing to that good work. And hopefully, if we have to go back through that again, we'll get there. Hopefully, we won't have to get off of no designation, but you never know. Historically, we've always focused on our threshold and being very cognizant of that in our community and the challenges of our community. The equitable state aid formula continues to be discussed, and it's also being discussed with reference to any withholdings that high needs districts, high needs, low wealth districts, of which we are. I saw today, and I will share it with the board. They actually did a printout of all of the small city school districts and their combined wealth ratios, and it was quite interesting, as well as their tax rate. We are number one in that area. We have the highest in that area, and we're actually one of the poorest. So it's an interesting thing to look at there as well. So I will provide that to the board in a future meeting, or I'll get that to you. It's very interesting. It came out today from small cities. And then the strategic targeted use of resources, and then monitoring very closely is always essential. The next slide, please. And then we have a strategy a little bit different than the way it's looked before, but breaking it into 4 areas or 5 areas there. Monitoring state, federal, and local revenue predictions very carefully. It talks about the transportation aid, the building aid projections. Will the state withhold the aid in the current year, and how will this impact Fulton in our present year? And what about federal aid for 21, 22, as well as really, are we going to get any more? Again, there's a number of different pieces there. To collect and analyze relevant district expenditure data. What I found using the Forecast 5 is you can really dig into objects and functions in the different areas, and you can actually look at 11 to 2007 in some cases, all the way to the current, and you can really look at trends. So there's some areas that I want to dig in and really take a deeper look, and to see if there's some different ways to be doing things there a little bit more effectively and efficiently. Evaluating all of our current programs and determining needs. This is really going to go to making sure that we're prioritizing all of our programs and services as we head into some difficult fiscal times. As a state, we're no different than any other districts that have similar wealth ratios and challenges. And then review all budget reduction possibilities. Obviously, as you go through a process, you have to do that. And then project impact of the 21-22 budget on long-term district goals and our strategic planning. And this is where I think use of Forecast 5 is really going to help us, being able to really dig in and say, wow, because it really sheds a light when you can look at it all at one time in a very quick way and compare ourselves to similar districts. And that document that I referenced a few minutes ago with respect to the small cities allows us now to say, wow, this district looks just like us. Let's run a comparison with them. And are there areas where they look really more efficient? And we can say, I wonder what they do there. And we can actually pick up the phone and maybe learn a little bit of something as to why they're doing so. I think that's a very good way for us to get an idea, to be able to get a better strategies and some ideas about how other places may be attacking. And some districts probably look at us. We get calls often about things too, to say, how are you addressing this in this kind of way? And then the final slide is just our next steps, I believe. In the budget part, we're going to have the budget workshops and the budget committee meetings. Those were discussed and present on our board docs at the last meeting. We'll provide updates at all of our regular board education meetings, and then we'll do the complete budget calendar, and resources will be available on the budget section of the district website as well. So if we could go back to the parameters, and I just want to, if we could have a little bit of discussion, if there's any questions. But I thought it's kind of the target tonight was to really get an idea of our budget parameters this evening. And obviously, this budget is a working thing from the moment we start to the moment we hopefully have a passed budget, and then we have to implement that budget. So, Ms. Griffin, I can turn it to you. I don't know how we'd like to have any discussion. We haven't done this type of approach to budget parameters in a while. I know that you and Mr. Cordone would have been here probably when we had the most in-depth discussions about parameters. And we did do some in my first couple of years, and we've done them every year. But I just want to make sure where we're at now.
Well, I'm going to start. Do any of my colleagues, anybody want to go first with your thoughts on what Brian's laid out? And
Can I ask a question
Go ahead.
to start with? When do we find out if we get the last 20%?
The other day I had a magic 8-ball in my hand, and I asked that question in front of my guy. I needed a little levity. But actually today what we heard was that even from the person from the assembly that we talked to as late as about 12:30 today, right now they're really anticipating that the rubber hits the road in January, because the executive has to put out the executive budget. There's a certain day, is it the 21st of January? There's a certain date in January where there has to be a release. And so the rubber will really hit the road then, because there has to be a budget that comes out to us. There has to be state aid runs for us to start to work from. And so really he believed today that January window is really going to be important, and we'll really have a better idea as to what is happening at the federal level. I saw a little movement today, but I didn't like the part about there was a lot of questions around providing state and local municipalities with funding. That seems to be one of the major concerns right now at the federal level, and the discussions that are happening. There is a new government kind of coming in, and different people in different places but to answer your question, Lynn, is hopefully in January. It was good news today that we didn't seem to have any withheld, so that was good news.
Okay, thanks.
So I want to say one thing before we start. This is consistent with past years when we've had major budget difficulties, and I would make the observation I still find it true. Our expenditures are reflective of a very strong program that helps all of our students get what they need. Our issue here, again, is revenue. It's a revenue problem more than it is an expenditure. It will become, if the revenues, though, are a problem, then our expenditures become a problem. But so it really starts with the revenue. And unless we get a lot of help, and when I say we, I'm talking our state, I mean, everyone, and this is nationwide, unless there's a lot of help coming forward, I anticipate that we may see we don't have enough revenue to support the expenditures of our programming. And so so the approach here, I appreciate what you and your team have put together, Brian, because to me, it reflects that that's exactly how you're thinking, that you're going to try to maintain or change up the program to maintain as much as possible within our revenue, what we can afford.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'll leave it there, and somebody else want to go with your thoughts, questions, concerns? Are you okay with this approach? Anybody at least, are you good with the approach that Brian's taking at this time then?
I am.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think you notice it's a little different package, a little bit different way. One of the things we're trying to do this year, because we learned a lot last year when I think we had over almost 2,500 votes last year in ballots in that process, is that you remember that there are over 11,000 voters in our community that are eligible. At least that's how many ballots, with over 11,000 ballots last year, so somewhere in the ballpark. And we have to make sure that we're presenting things. So a little bit different way of presenting information in multiple ways, a little bit more graphs, a little bit more trying to be less wordy and more specific. If there's anything with my new team that I'm learning is I'm learning how to be much more narrow and focused with my words. So I thank them for that.
So I guess I will ask again, is there anything going forward that you think you need as a board member to help you understanding, or are you good again with the format change that Brian's going with?
I like the format, but what I will ask is that we stay as close to speaking to the public that they can understand as we can. This is going to be a tough go. So I'd like them to know from the get-go exactly what's going on.
So real plain language, is that what you're telling me?
You got it.
Got it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Ms. Griffin, obviously this is a living thing. And on December 15th, this is kind of our initial, if you remember, as I said, we normally not even talk about kind of what roll forward or things look like. This, I think, though, is an important, good foundation. It starts to lay the groundwork, as we said, as you said as well, and reinforce that revenues are really the key to this whole ball game this year, and the ability to use those revenues to maximize whatever we can do for our kids and maintain what we're doing.
If I can make one other observation, you had a slide that demonstrated we can't rely on if the revenues do not come through, we cannot rely on burning up all of our reserves and our fund balance, because it will be gone in a couple of years.
Dan,
So,
I agree.
you can see it there.
so we need to be strategic.
Yep.
With how we utilize those dollars as much as anything else. And the other thing I will say to you is I know we will be using some of them. That's what you do during times like this. Our district has a history going back many, many years. It takes a long time to rebuild those reserves. So once we start, we won't be putting money back in there to help us out. So it will, once it's gone, it's gone. So
Right.
very
Good point. Yeah, and just a reminder that this one is flat state aid. That's what you're looking at right there. That's not if there's 5%, 10%, then that curve starts to go and it starts to dip much faster than it does right there.
correct. And I would also stress again, going back to thinking about David's question, right sizing has been something that this district has worked on for decades, and we need to continue. As painful as that is, it's not easy to do, but it's the only thing we can do. We've never had an overabundance of revenue to not be able to do that. We really must stay the course.
Yep, and it's a reminder. That's a great point. I will send out, Jean, remind me, we'll send to the board that the end of the year, when we did the budget forum, is always a great one that captures the essence of everything we did last year. Just a great summary document to always think about what we did. We reduced by $2.2 million last year. We used no reserves or fund balance for the last 2 years. So we have made, $2.2 million. And we came in with a balanced budget coming into this school year. And if you remember, we were at 1.8 and we went for the other 400 and we reduced down to come in. So some districts, as the call came, as I was on that call today, actually went 20% lower to start with, which I can't imagine what they did, although they may not have been a district that made those reductions over the years. If you look back, we have been right sizing, as you said, every year. We're very cognizant of that. And I think it's a great point. And the chart, which I don't have on here, actually shows that our enrollment actually matches pretty nicely with what we're doing. But it's a great way. We got to keep an eye on that. But when you do that, there's not as much. You're pretty lean going in every year.
Yes.
We've been, but again, we will use that same technique and strategy. But this is that, again, it depends on resignation, retirement. There's all different kinds of things that come into all of this mix, as well as any unfunded mandates that we don't come seeing. And there's still discussion out there, even if the vaccinations are out there, how long are we wearing PPE? How long do we have to do some of those strategies beyond the vaccine? I don't know. There's percentages they talk about, things like that. So it's just in the back of your mind, what does that need to look like to get back into the groove of having 100% of our students in schools again, right where we need them and where they belong.
Well, and speaking of PPE, Brian, I would point out that in over the decades, the low-hanging fruit, I would call it, in a budget that you would cut for on the expenditure side, people tend to go right into your maintenance. Well, we're in a position that's not there because we have to deal with the health and safety of our buildings, and more so than ever. So,
an area where we did make a reduction in some pieces last year.
Yeah, right. But there's not going to be. There's not
right.
there.
There's
so.
not. Right. We were very equitable across, really trying to get a balanced reduction last year so that we can maintain everything that we were doing for our students.
So I just cautionary. I'm a little fearful that this is going to be painful this year, this budget, unless we get an influx of help from outside. So again, be prepared. I know you will do your best, and we'll be armed with lots of questions, and we'll make sure that you turned over all the rocks. I'm sure my colleagues are very thoughtful people.
Yep. Well, I look forward to going into this with my team and our board. Looking, if we have to go in to do something like this, I think we're a formidable force that will do the best we can for this community and our kids.
Okay. No other questions you've got?
No, I would just reiterate what Lynn said for the sake of the community, to make sure that in terms of our communication, it's language that is understandable. Not that folks aren't intelligent, but in this world of sound bites, living by sound bites and condensed information, I think it's really essential as we continue this work to make sure that the community is with us and they're following and understanding along the way.
Absolutely.
Well, and one last thing I was reminded of by a community member is people don't have a lot of time to read lots of pages of things. So again, as much as we can simplify and condense in a way that allows us to explain is really what people are looking for.
Yep.
If that's it, then I am going to, Brian, if you're all set, I'll ask to close the meeting.
Thank you. I'm all set. I appreciate it. Happy holidays, everybody. Merry Christmas.
You too.
Merry Christmas to you all.
Item 3.01.
Move it. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, can you raise your hand? I don't know if we can see everybody. I see 1, 2, 3. David, I can't see you, so are you good?
I'm good.
All right. Unanimous, and we're out of here. Merry Christmas. Stay healthy, everyone. Please enjoy your holidays as much as possible. I know it's an odd year. I'll see you in the new year. Take care.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.